Check the description for the following discount codes. It's been 2 weeks now since the VR beta for EA WRC 2023 has been released, and I thought it was about time I gave it a go. People are going to want to know how it runs on various different systems. Now, my computer system here is, I said in the title, average, and it's an RTX 3080 and a 5800X CPU with 32 gig of RAM. Now, the RTX 3080, by today's standards, I don't know if really it's an average card. It probably is mid-high rather than mid-range. But you've got to remember the 4080 and the 4090 obviously both outperform it quite substantially. The 4070 is probably the closest to it now, maybe even the 4060. I haven't actually looked at any benchmarks to see. So perhaps maybe it isn't quite average, but it might be an average sim racer's level of graphics card, because we tend to have reasonably good spec computers, apart from the guys running sort of the entry level stuff. But there is a good portion of us out there, especially if you've got a VR headset as well, you may well have a half decent graphics card. So RTX 3080, 5800X CPU, again, it's not a new CPU, it's a few years old, and by today's standards, it's not top of the tree. So I was as curious as what a lot of other people will be as to how it runs, and the answer is badly. I know it's in beta, but I thought it's still got to be worth reporting back on, really. The Quest 3 is a very common headset, and it's a good headset also. So I'm just going to put, actually no, before I put the footage up of me driving, I'll just run through the options that I kind of played with. Let's have a look at this first clip here. The render resolution for the Quest headset itself in the Oculus or Meta software, you can see I'm running at 72 Hertz. There was no chance of going any higher than that. And to get it stable at 72, I had to run the render resolution either at maximum, but you don't get excited, but that meant running it on ultra low in the in-game advanced graphics settings. So it looked like a PlayStation 1. Or I could use 1.1, which was, as you see there, 4704 by 2528, still at 72. And I could run that on medium settings, and it would hold pretty much a solid 72 Hertz. I did get the odd slow down every now and then. I mean, proper jerky. It must have dropped to half that, but only for a few seconds. I don't know why. There was no obvious increase in graphical load, but then this is beta, so these things can happen. But those were the two choices I kind of played around with. Now, with VR, there's millions of options and tweaks you can try, but to keep it simple for the video, it was either ultra low settings and maximum render resolution for a sharp render image, but then you trade it off by being able to count the pixels because your textures are such a low resolution in the game. And then the opposite was go from that up to medium, which looked quite a bit better. But I mean, let me just play this clip whilst I'm talking. It looked quite a bit better, but it was still really, in my opinion, unplayable. The issue is, and you can't really, in the footage here doesn't show you how I could see it in my headset. We're looking at a camera pointing at a screen that's probably 2 meters away. Whereas with the VR headset on your head, and you're in that cockpit that you can see on my sort of center display of my triples here, the pixels were still very, very noticeable, very pixelated. And it actually made it hard to drive. Normally, I'm actually a little bit faster in VR, but I found it difficult to make out the details, to make out even when the corners were approaching, because the road and the foliage all kind of blend into one when it's that pixelated. Again, it doesn't really, you can't really see it here in the footage, but when that headset straps to your head and you've got it even on medium, it just isn't sharp enough, and there isn't enough detail to be able to have what I would call fun. and certainly not be competitive. Now I've raced on this stage quite a few times, so I do know the stage, but even then I'm still hitting things that I wouldn't normally have hit if I was just playing, you know, on my monitor in front of me. And it's just down to the fact that everything, when it gets a little busy and gets a little fast and there's lots of foliage and textures and trees and all sorts going on, you're like, oh my God, I can't quite make out where I'm going. I can't quite make out where I'm supposed to be, you know. It's just, yeah, it's just not there for someone with my spec PC. I dare say, you know, if you've got a 4080 or a 4090, then you're going to have a much, much better experience. But as you can see here in the footage, I'm struggling just to get round without hitting things, you know, and rally is like what I primarily do as far as sim racing goes, which is also why I desperately want them to release triple screen support for it, because as you can see, there's two side screens there that aren't doing anything. Not that they would be with a VR headset on anyway, but yeah, it was fun to try. And, you know, it was a bit of a laugh. We'll just stop this now. Yeah, it was a bit of a laugh to try, you know, and I enjoyed, I do love being in VR and getting in a cockpit of a car or a plane or a spaceship if it's Star Wars Squadrons. There really is nothing quite like it. But if it looks so bad that you can't see what you're doing and where you're going, and then additional sort of frame rate drops and that as well, it's not really usable. And that's really the conclusion at the moment for those of us with an average gaming spec PC, RTX 3080, 5800X CPU and 32 gig of RAM. You just don't get a good enough experience. I know a lot of people have been waiting for VR to come out for this, just like I'm waiting for triples. So I thought it'd be interesting to jump in, spend some time messing around. I probably spent like, what is the time now? Probably spent three hours altogether, because I had all sorts of other issues as well, like my direct drive wheelbase not being reckoned, my handbrake not working. I only wanted to register a digital input, it wouldn't take analog, and all this sort of faffing about. Oh, and the other thing with VR, when the VR beta was first released 2 weeks ago, connecting wirelessly over virtual desktop didn't work. That wasn't an option. That now is an option, but it works way worse than using the Oculus software, both wired or wireless, depending what you want to do with your Oculus software. But comparing the wireless to the virtual desktop option, virtual desktop probably runs 50-60% of the frame rate, and then you just, you know, swap straight over to using the Oculus Air Link and it bumps straight up. So certainly for now, if you do want to play with this, I would recommend, assuming you've got a Quest, using the Oculus Air Link software, not virtual desktop. And as I demonstrated earlier, you know, you can go maximum render resolution, but then you've got to go literally ultra low settings in game, which is PlayStation 1 style graphics. Or you can bring the render resolution down 1.1 and then go medium, and it will hold for the most part 72 Hertz. But for me, I was still struggling to see exactly where I was going, you know, being able to judge the apex of corners, when to yank the handbrake, you know, where's that bush that I normally use as a visual reference? I don't know, it blends in with all the other giant pixels dotted around my virtual world, which is a shame because it is cool. I mean, I don't normally race in VR, I do get motion sickness, so I do feel a little bit now, because it was a few hours ago that I was actually doing all this testing. I mean, that didn't help by the fact that I was running at much lower frame rates than what I should be, as I was, you know, playing with the settings to try and find sort of most usable options I could. So had I gone straight in with a known good setting, 72 Hertz, medium, 1.1 render, or ultra low, 1.3 render, 72 Hertz, I probably wouldn't feel quite as ill as I do now. So if I look a little peaky, that is why. Anyway, that's where it is at the moment on what I would call, you know, an average sim racer spec PC or gamer spec PC with an Oculus or Meta Quest 3. Currently, I would say by all means, if you've got one and you've got the game, poke your head in and give it a go. But don't go out and buy the game because you've been waiting for VR and expect to jump in with my sort of spec PC and have a playable time, because whilst you can get the frame rate solid, the visual experience is so poor it hinders your driving. So as always, thank you very much for watching and take it easy.